Hello again. I'm back with another clock to repair. I found this one at an antique store. It looked to have been sitting there for quite a long time. No price on it, so I offered the guy $20, and I think he was happy to get rid of it. I could tell that it needed a lot of work, and there's no marking on it, so I really don't know who manufactured it or how old it is. I'll show you some of the things I'm seeing. It came with a key and a pendulum, which has a bit of a crack where it attaches. A small part down here, of which I don't know what this is for. A bell, the kind you would see back in the day on a telephone, perhaps. The dial is loose. There's some nails that were holding it in which are missing. I haven't tried to wind it. Every time I touch it, I do hear it ticking a bit, but then it stops. There's a small dial in the center which has the minutes on it, and I'm able to rotate it, but I really don't know the function of it. Turning it around, there's really not much to see. But I'm going to look to take it apart at some point, but first, let's see what happens if I try to wind it. Yeah, so it really wasn't wound at all. And I hear it ticking rather rapidly without the pendulum. Well, let's see what happens when I advance the hands. Well, it looks like the bell is not functioning, unless I didn't wind it enough. I'll try again. Well, that's about all the way. Well, it's definitely unusual. Let me get it set up on my work table, and I'll look to take it apart. I mentioned initially that the numbers on this inner dial were minutes, but they're actually the hours. 1 through 12 is printed on here. I'm not yet sure how this functions, but I figured out why this is not chiming on the half hour. Let me wind up the chime spring and I'll show you. Instead of chiming on the half hour or the hour, this is an alarm clock. And somehow this inner dial is how you set for what time you want the alarm to go off. Now here it rang at about, looks like 1:20. If I turn this a little bit, let's wind it again and see what happens. Now, I have the 12 is on the 12, but I still don't know how you're supposed to use this to set the alarm. Very unusual. And it rotates along with the hands. Anyway, I still have to try to take this apart. I have to figure out how to get the pendulum attached. So let me take a closer look and we'll get started. The first thing to do is remove the hands, and they are held on by what's known as a tapered pin. I should be able to slip it out. And I really don't know much in the way of the history of alarm clocks, but I'm guessing this could be a very early one. I don't know when they first started making them, but this could be as old as you can find. Okay, got the pin. Don't lose it. I got one little washer. Looks like another one. Whoop. The hand came with it. So we have 2 washers and the minute hand. the hour hand. And this is not exactly coming off, is it? Oh, there we go. Okay. To get the dial off, there's one nail left holding it. Let's see if I can pry it out. I think I got it. And I lost it. Okay, fortunately I can come up with another one of those. Let's see how this spring went. This is clearly meant to not alarm for too long. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's try to move the hand. Now the alarm should not ring if I try to wind it. And yet it is. Well, the bottom line for what I'm seeing is that it's a very small spring here, as well as on this side. It's almost as if you have to wind this clock almost daily. Whoop. But let me take a closer look, figure out how to take it out of here, and try to discover what makes this one tick. Instead of taking it out, I think I figured out how to set the alarm, what makes it work. So I put the dial back on, put the hands back on. I use a little piece of paper clip as my tapered pin to hold the hands in. And what I'm finding is if I turn this dial so that the number I want the alarm to ring is pointing to the hour hand. Right now it's on the 12. Let's say I turn this all the way to the 4. And then advance the hands till 4 o'clock, and let's see what happens. So it looks like around 4:15 it rang. If I go to, let's say, 6, the hour hand, 6 on the hour hand. Try it again. So that's how it works. Very clever. And I'm wondering just how necessary is it now for me to take the whole thing apart. But I do have to figure out a way to hang the pendulum. Okay, that's the bell, which hung from here. There had to be, I don't know if this is part of it. Could have been. Anyway, give me some time. I gotta figure out what I can come up with in terms of hanging the pendulum. So that could take a while. Well, I figured out what it needs, and it turns out the pendulum does not fit through this rod here. It needs to be attached to what's called a pendulum suspension spring. And the one in this clock is broken. There's a little bit of it over here. I'll try to show it. Every time you touch this clock, it starts ticking. This is what's left of the suspension spring. So what I ended up having to do was ordering a new one, which looks like this. And there's a hole in the flexible part on the top and just a metal rod. And it's hard to see, but I'll show it again. It looks to me like a tapered pin is holding this into position here. Let me show you that. You can see up the side there, little tapered pin. One side is flattened, so I think I have to pull it up towards the right. And what I would have to do is measure this so that once it's in position here, it comes down far enough, and then have to bend a curve on here so that the pendulum can fit through it, and get it at a height where I figure I want the pendulum to be about here. So I need to cut this and bend the end of it, pull out this pin and place this in here, and hopefully I'll have the length proper. I'm going to start making it longer than I need, and if it turns out it's not running properly, I can always shorten it. Obviously you can't go the other way. So that'll take quite a bit of time, I imagine. Let me work on that, and once I have this rod adjusted, or actually it's a suspension spring, I will continue. And just for the sake of accuracy, it's the suspension spring that passes through this rod that goes back and forth. This will be coming through here. And then the pendulum is attaching to the bottom of that, and you can see how much I have to cut off of it. So let me get to work. First, let me see how easy it is to remove this tapered pin. I'll zoom in on it. Oh, okay, that might just work. Oh. There you go. That wasn't bad at all. Put this aside. Zoom out a little bit. And now I will work on fitting this in, placing the tapered pin to hold it in place, and then measuring exactly where I want to cut the rod on this. So back to work. Okay, I've done a few things here. I've shortened it. I bent the bottom into a hook that will allow me to attach the pendulum, so it should be able to hang. And this flexible portion, at first I thought this was plastic, but this is metal, and the hole was too small to allow that tapered pin to fit through. So I had to drill a hole, or drill into the hole to make it larger, which roughened up the metal on either side enough that I could no longer pass this through the slot here. So with a small file, I had to file this smooth. And what I hope to do now is attach this here with reinserting that tapered pin. Let's see if I can zoom in for it. Hopefully this won't take too much time. Okay, let's see if I can line up the hole. See if we get lucky here. I think I got it. Now try to tighten it up a bit. Okay. And the one thing I did not do was slip it through here. But hopefully I can bend this out just a little bit and not have to undo it. Got it. Next, If this was in an upright position, I would attach the pendulum. And see if it works. So let me get this set up on my workbench and we'll see what happens. I have it set up. I'll hang the pendulum, and I have figured out what this little bent piece of wire is for. This is actually what's left of the suspension spring. There's a small hook on the bottom of it, which is where the pendulum would have hung. I don't know who or why they bent this, but anyway, I'm pretty sure that's what that is. For now though, let me hang the pendulum. Give it a start, and we'll see what happens. Well, that didn't last too long. Let me make sure it's wound all the way. Sounds like it's slowing down. Yep. Well, I think the next step is going to be I'll have to take out the whole mechanism and take it apart, clean it, lubricate it, and hopefully that's the reason that it's not running as well as it should. So back to the work table, and we'll get started on that. Now, before I take this apart, one thing that's bothering me is the fact that before I put this suspension spring on here, giving this arm a little touch would get this clock ticking where it wouldn't stop ticking until the spring would wind down, whether it was laying on its back or standing upright. So I'm wondering if the length of this metal part of the spring is too long for this clock. The piece that I removed, although it's broken off down here, perhaps it wasn't quite this long. So I'm thinking of shortening this and seeing if that makes a difference. Let me just remove it and we'll see if it starts ticking again the way it had in the past. There you go. So really, I'm not convinced that cleaning and lubricating is the issue, but let me try to adjust this. The one fortunate thing is when I obtained this spring, and they're really very inexpensive, but you can't buy one. It came, I think it was a packet of a dozen of them. So I can definitely play around with these and create all different lengths, and we'll see what happens. But first I'll start with this one, maybe cut it halfway, place a new hole in it, and see what happens. All right, let me get to work on that. Okay, I've set it back up on my work table. I shortened the pendulum spring and I've reattached it, but unfortunately, when I hook up the pendulum, I'm finding that it still only goes for a few seconds before stopping. And I really don't know yet why it's doing that. The other thing that I have discovered, unfortunately, is that when I try to run it without the pendulum, instead of winding all the way down, now it stops again after about maybe 15 or 20 seconds. And this one should stop shortly. And there you go. And if I take this off, and I really don't know what's different to cause it not to just keep going on its own. But I think what I'm going to have to do is remove the mechanism and look to totally take it apart. Hopefully I'll get lucky, and when it's reassembled it'll start to work properly. So let me get this back on my work table and I'll start removing it from the case. To get this out, I have to undo the 4 screws that are holding it in. I'll do that on my own and then we'll continue from there. Okay, they're out. Let me try to lift this out of here. That wasn't too hard. Let's see if I can wind up the spring, see what happens. Well, for some reason, the alarm keeps going. So I'll let it wind down, then I'll take a closer look to figure out how I'm going to take it apart. There we go. So there's 4 screws holding this top plate on. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll take a few photos so I have a good record of how all these gears are arranged, and then I'll proceed from there. I figured out why the alarm was ringing. It's because it was set to ring at that time. I put that little disc back on, put the hands back on, and I have the dial turned pointing to the hour hand, and it's at the number 8, which means when I advance this to 8 o'clock, it should start ringing. There's 7. So that seems to be functioning properly. And now I can proceed with taking my photos and start to take this apart. I've got my photos, and a couple of concerns I have. One is when I remove the springs from here, am I going to be able to get them back in, because they're not in a barrel. I'm not sure how they're connected to the arbor yet. Another thing I'm noticing that's interesting is this is a spring that holds this part in place. If I lift it up, move it across, that'll free up this whole part right here, which is kind of an unusual design. However, let me get this back on. Whoop. There we go. But what I want to do first, I have to let down this spring so it doesn't pop out on me when I take the plates apart. So let's see how to do that. Let me zoom out a little bit for this, make it easier to see, I think. So you have the click, which is what holds the spring in position. I have to move that away, which will allow the spring to unwind, and you need to use a letdown key. You put the right size key in your handle, and what I'll do is I'll turn the key a little bit as if winding it. And I'm not sure if you can see this, but, and then I move the click aside with a screwdriver and then allow it to just spin down. And there you have it. The spring is let down. Next, I'm going to take a look to see if there's any of these parts that can be removed before I take the plates apart. So let me take a closer look, and then I'll continue from there. I think I have a pretty good idea of how I'm going to proceed with this. There's actually a little clip holding this disc over the gear. It almost looks like a miniature paper clip. And I think if I bend that out, this disc will come off, which will allow me to get this gear out and this gear. Right now what's holding this one down is the suspension spring. So I also have to remove the tapered pin and get that off. I'll move the spring aside, which will allow this part to be removed. And I'm going to do all that on my own. each time I remove a part, I'll take a photo so I have a good record of exactly how it should go back together. So let me get started on all of that. I'll show how I managed to remove these parts. First, I took the little clip off of here, which is this. That let me remove this disc, and then this gear. This one isn't coming off yet. I don't know how it's attached on the underside, but we'll find out. I move this spring aside, and this comes off. And that seems to be all I can do from this side. So I'm going to look to undo these 4 nuts next and see if I can just lift this plate off. I've removed 3 of the nuts. Let me zoom in a bit. And I'll take off the last one. And let's see what happens. Okay, something's not coming out. I gotta take a closer look. I don't want everything to fall apart, which is almost what's happening here, so give me a moment. Well, I'm not too sure what's going to happen, but we'll find out. Well, that's a nice little mess, isn't it? Well, this goes back here. This is still in. This, I believe, went here. And this, I'm not sure where this one went. But that's why I'll consult the photos I took, and I'm sure I'll be able to figure it out. So let me take a closer look, along with additional photos of what I have here now. I've figured out how it comes apart, how it goes back together, along with a few interesting things, and let me try to show you. This one comes off, and then this, and this. This spring is wrapped around this post, slides out. This gear comes out of here, but this one I can't remove. There's one of these little paperclip type pins holding this arbor in, so this one stays there. But over here you can see the click. Here's the click wheel, and this is the spring that keeps the click tucked up against the wheel. This is what I move out of the way when I let it down. Just trying to move it over to the side a little bit. Anyway, that's that. And the arbor on this spring, I'm able to remove. And the way this connects to the spring is sort of a little notch or a key sticking out of the side of it, and it locks into a small hole inside the spring here. Once you put it in and turn it, it sort of locks onto the spring. So what I'm going to do next, clean up all of these gears, look to lubricate everything. I'll place these in my ultrasonic with some hot soapy water. I'm not going to put this in because I don't want these springs to rust. I'll have to clean these by hand and lubricate both of them. So let me get to work on all of that. Also, I need to see which ones I can remove from this plate as well. So let me take a look at this next. With this plate, I can't remove any of these parts. This gear is held on, this other gear is slipped over the stem. I'm not going to try to force that off, so that's staying put. This gear is riveted on, and this part is pinned in. And this spring, although I can manipulate it a little bit in here, I can't angle it enough to get it out. Not that it matters. It looks as if, and the top of it is flattened, it looks as if this was placed in here straight and then bent into the position that they wanted it. However, I think it's pretty safe to put this whole thing in the ultrasonic as well. So let me get everything cleaned up and then I'll continue. Everything has been cleaned and I'll try to explain exactly what I did. This plate, as mentioned, went into the ultrasonic along with these gears over here. This plate I cleaned by hand. I was able to clean the springs. I dipped a piece of gauze in some alcohol and just wiped around the edges of it, both springs. Then using a small brush, dipping it in synthetic clock oil, I put a very thin coat around all the sides of the springs. What I have to do next is reassemble everything. The first step would be to lubricate the pivots, the ends of the gears, and the holes or the bushings in the plates. And the way that's done is with a small oil pen. Just dip it in the oil. You're applying it only to the very end of the pivot, as well as in the hole where the pivot's going to fit. And that's the only lubrication that you need to do. As far as putting this back together, I believe it's going to go here. And I think this is here. I think it's this way. This one will go here. And this goes, no, I got it wrong. This one's here. There we go. The spring, this part has to go back over this post, and then the arbor has to be placed back into the hole here. That could be a bit tricky, but I got it. Okay. Next, I have to reseat this plate right over the top, and the way to do it is you want to initially guide the arbor into both holes here. Once that's in, I want to get the one side of the plate into the, no, it's not quite going down, is it? Get in there, there we go. Definitely a bit of a struggle, eh? Something's off here. Okay, once the plate is seated, you want to place one of the nuts in position. And then same thing on the other side. And what that does is, as you're teasing the pivots into position, the plate won't pop out. Because if it does get loose, it'll knock everything out of whack that you've carefully put into the right position. This will go between the plates in here, and this is going to go here, with the little spring clip going back over it. So what I'm going to do is pretty much, and this will fit over here, take it back apart, lubricate everything, reassemble it, secure it with the nuts, so when I return, everything should be back together. This is a different view, but it's pretty cool. I got everything back together. I, as you can see, placed the little alarm dial and the hands, and then I hung it on this sort of a makeshift support system I have for movements. I attached the pendulum spring and the pendulum, and it's actually been running now for about 5 minutes, and I think it's going to work. So I'm really quite pleased with how this is coming out, and what I'm going to do next is place it back into the case and set it up and hope that it continues to run. But what I decided to do first was I let it run overnight, and it's still going. And at one point during the night, the alarm went off. You can tell because the alarm spring is much further out than it was a moment ago. And now I think I'm ready to place this back into the case. Just a few things I want to mention before proceeding with the case. One of the things I did to the movement, which may be a big reason why it's now running, is the rod here that the suspension spring passes through. Once I took this off, I discovered it was really quite bent out of shape. So I just carefully straightened it out, and I think that may have a lot to do with everything moving quite well. Another thing I was trying to find out was exactly how old the clock is. So I reached out to the NAWCC, the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors, sent them a few photos of it. They have a forum where you can post questions. And someone got back to me telling me that this clock was made sometime, he said, in his words, a few years of either side of 1900, which to me tells me it could be anywhere from 1897 to 1903, which makes this clock somewhere between 120 to 125 years old, which I find quite remarkable, as well as remarkable that I got it working. As far as the case is concerned, I want to clean it up. There is a great deal of dust and dirt you can see here. I'll use a wood cleaner to go over the whole thing. Probably look to restore it with my Howard's Restore Finish, and then give it a bit of a wax polishing. As far as getting this back in here, the next step will be to see, is the clock running fast or slow? The way to adjust for that, there's a little screw here to adjust the pendulum, and by raising the pendulum up, the clock will go faster. By lowering it down, it goes slow, as in speed up and slow down. If that isn't enough to correct the time discrepancies, I may have to replace the suspension spring. Perhaps cutting it off as I did isn't what you're supposed to do. Maybe I really needed the full length of it, but time will tell. So for now, let me just get to work on cleaning up the case. Okay, it's been cleaned and stained and polished. I think it's looking a lot better. I also found that these finials were a little bit loose, so I removed them and re-glued them back into position. The glass was a bit loose, so I removed these little wooden pieces that hold it in and re-nailed them in tighter, so that's a better fit. This piece was a bit loose, it's screwed in. I tightened that, and now I'm ready to place the movement back in. I'm going to secure it with the 4 screws. I also have to remove the hands. So I can get the dial over it. So let me tighten this up on my own, and then I'll continue. Everything is secure. Now to reposition the dial. And I've come up with some brass nail pins, which I think should work to replace the ones that are missing. One will go there. Here. And let's see if I can tap these in. All right, I think that'll work. Next, I have to position the alarm dial and the hands. And I always set up the hands to try to synchronize it. I'll put the hour hand on, actually the minute hand first, pointing to the 12. which I think is where it's at. Yep, okay, good. So put the hour hand on the 12. And the minute hand. Then there were a couple of washers that fit over this. I think this one first, and then this. And now I have to insert that small tapered pin. Okay. All right. Next, I'm going to set this up on my work table, or workbench actually, and hang the pendulum, make sure it's still running, and then I'm going to keep an eye on it to see just how accurate it is, try to adjust the pendulum as needed, and once I think I have it working just right, I will give you what might be the last look at it. I've got it up and running, and what I'm finding is that it's been running a little slow. I've adjusted the pendulum as high as I can get it, and over a 4-hour period, it's about 1 minute slow. And the only way that I'm going to be able to correct it is I'm going to have to remove the pendulum spring, and that little hook that's on the bottom that's holding the pendulum, I just have to bend that up a little higher so the pendulum sits a bit higher. And I have every confidence that I'll be able to get it running really quite accurately. The other thing I want to check on is the accuracy of the alarm. And what I've been finding is if you set the number on the hour hand, it's ringing a bit early. So in playing around with it, if I set it between two numbers, that seems to pretty much have it ring on the hour. I have it set now to between the 3 and the 4, so it should really ring at 3 o'clock. Let's see how close I get. So a couple of minutes to 3, which really isn't that bad, considering how old this clock is. If you were using it to wake up, if it rang 5 minutes early or slow, it's really not going to have that much of an effect. So there you have it. This is a German alarm clock. It was made in the town of Württemberg, and I'm being told that the age of it was manufactured sometime between 1898 and 1902. Which puts it in the neighborhood of about 125 years old. It's by far the oldest clock that I've worked on, and I'm really quite pleased with how it came out. I think it will be running accurately, and it's functioning the way it's supposed to. I know this was a very long video. I hope you were able to hang in there for it. I look forward to hearing any comments on it, and feel free to check out some of my other videos. That pretty much wraps things up. Bye for now.